His Excellency Mr. Vladimir Putin is here in New Delhi. In fact, the talks are going on still as we speak, but given the lateness of the hour, we thought we would have an interaction with you. For this, we're really privileged to have with us Shri Harshvardhan Shringla, Foreign Secretary, sir, from the Ministry of External Affairs. We are also joined with us by our ambassador to the Russia, Shri Pavan Kapoor, on my right here. We also have on my left Dr. Adarsh Swaika, Joint Secretary in the Eurasia Division of the Ministry. I would request Foreign Secretary, sir, to say a few initial words and then we'll open it up for some questions.
Namaskar and good evening, and thank you for bearing with us so late in the evening. We wanted to make sure that the talks were concluded before we started our briefing. As you know, the President of the Russian Federation, His Excellency Mr. Vladimir Putin, is on a brief working visit to India. He is here in the context of the 21st India-Russia Annual Summit. As you're aware, this is President Putin's second visit out of Russia since the COVID pandemic began. The only other visit he has undertaken was a brief visit to Geneva for the Russia-US summit that he had with President Biden. The fact that President Putin has decided to visit India for our annual summit exceptionally is an indication of the importance he attaches to the bilateral relationship and, of course, his personal rapport with Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji. You're also aware that President Putin had conferred Russia's highest civilian award on the Prime Minister in 2019. The visit of President Putin is short, but nonetheless highly productive, highly substantive. There were excellent discussions between the two leaders, and much of this will be reflected in the outcome document that is expected to be issued shortly. The visit concluded in a joint statement titled India-Russia Partnership for Peace, Progress and Prosperity. The joint statement captures the state and future potential of our relationship. In all, a record number of 28 agreements or MOUs were concluded during this visit. These agreements were both government to government as well as business to business, including involving our public sector units in both countries. The agreements cover a very wide range of sectors, including trade, energy, culture, intellectual property, accountancy, cyber attacks in the banking sector, manpower, geological exploration, survey, education, etc. India and Russia have also signed a program of cooperation in the field of defense for the next 10 years, 2021 to 2031. The diversity of agreements and MOUs signed today shows the multifaceted nature of our bilateral partnership. We will be sharing the joint statement and the list of agreements concluded with you shortly. The Prime Minister and President Putin held in-depth discussions on strengthening our bilateral and multilateral cooperation in the spirit of our special and privileged strategic partnership. Both leaders noted that the extent of our bilateral cooperation in fighting the COVID pandemic was significant, in particular in the areas of vaccines and humanitarian assistance. It would be recalled that fairly early in the COVID pandemic, India had supplied COVID-related medicines to 25 regions and over 60 hospitals of Russia. In the same spirit of solidarity, Russia supported our efforts to fight the second wave of the pandemic. You will also recall that President Putin spoke to Prime Minister Modi on the 28th of April this year, after which there was extensive Russian support and solidarity in the form of the supply of concentrators, medicines, and so on and so forth. Prime Minister thanked President Putin for the welfare of the Indian community in Russia, especially during the COVID pandemic, particularly for the 15,000 Indian students resident in Russia. Both leaders discussed the need for mutual recognition of vaccine certification to enable easier travel of our citizens to each other's countries. The enhancing bilateral trade and investments figured prominently in the talks. This year we have noticed an encouraging trend of growth in our trade compared to last year, when there was a downturn owing to the COVID pandemic. Obviously, I think both sides are looking forward to continued increase in the trade and investment trajectory. Some very ambitious targets have been set, and we are, I think, well on our way to achieving those both in the trade and investment side. There was talk of how to enhance our trade and economic cooperation, including through long-term procurement of essential commodities, elimination of trade barriers, strengthening inter-regional linkages, bolstering connectivity, including through the international north-south transport corridor and the Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor. These two initiatives are very important and special initiatives. We're happy to speak more about them as we have an interactive session following this statement. Also on the trade and investment side, I think there are some very specific plans which include long-term cooperation in the areas of inland waterways, civilian shipbuilding, fertilizer, coking coal, steel, skilled manpower. Essentially what we are looking at is long-term arrangements whereby some of the essential commodities that we need from Russia are available on some sort of arrangement that could be to our mutual benefit. Cooperation in coking coal, for example, has emerged as an important area of cooperation. In the last few years, we have supplied an MOU. We have signed an MOU in October with Russia for coking coal for the steel making industry in India. We have recently entered into short-term contracts for fertilizers. We are looking at long-term arrangements in both these areas, including also in other areas of energy that is of interest to both sides. There was a discussion on follow-up to cooperation in the Russian Far East. You will recall that Prime Minister had visited Vladivostok in 2009 for the last annual summit, where he was also guest of honor at the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. We know that a delegation from the government of Gujarat is now is visiting Russia in order to invite the governors of the Russian Far East for the Vibrant Gujarat Summit in January 2022. There are a number of other areas of cooperation there which are progressing, and I think the leaders had opportunity to take stock of that. There was also discussion in detail about our cooperation in the strategic area of energy. As you know, we are already importing crude oil, and we have a long-term contract for gas supplies with Russia. I think we have expressed interest in further investments in the oil and gas sectors in each other's countries, as well as in the area of petrochemicals. There are some specific projects which are on the anvil, and I think that will significantly enhance our two-way investments. Our cooperation, very important strategic cooperation in the area of civil, nuclear energy and space was also discussed, and both sides felt it was progressing well. We looked at what could be the next steps in all of these areas of very important cooperation. Cultural cooperation, people-to-people ties came up for discussion. We hope to further enhance this cooperation with the signing of a cultural exchange program for 2021-24. We are also looking at intensifying our Buddhist links with Russia. There are apparently 15 million Buddhists in Russia, and this community is keen on looking at India for pilgrimages, other areas of interest. So that cultural cooperation and that connect is also of interest to both countries. The President Putin and the Prime Minister exchanged views on regional and international issues of common interest. They decided to continue close consultation and coordination between India and Russia on the situation in Afghanistan, including for a peaceful, secure and stable Afghanistan with an inclusive government that represents all sections of society. Both sides were also very clear that Afghanistan territory should not be used for sheltering, training or financing any acts of terrorism. There were, of course, concerns over the issue of drugs and other concerns that could emanate from Afghanistan. There was a need to obviously felt that humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan was important. There was a lot of emphasis on the issue of counterterrorism. I think both sides were clear that this is an area of common interest, as of course, similarity views on all issues of regional and global importance. But in particular, I think counterterrorism was mentioned and discussed, and I think you will find that there was this fairly strong sense of joint sense on how to deal with terrorist entities such as ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Toiba, and other entities that are functioning in our neighborhood. During discussions on multilateral cooperation, the Prime Minister conveyed his personal appreciation to President Putin for his participation in the high-level segment on maritime security that India hosted under its presidency of the UN Security Council in the month of August. President Putin confirmed Russia's continued support for the permanent membership of India in a reformed and expanded UN Security Council. He also acknowledged and thanked India for its support for Russia's observership both in NAM as well as the Indian Ocean Rim Association. The summit was preceded by a bilateral meeting between our defense ministers and our foreign ministers, and the convening of the Intergovernmental Commission on military and military technical cooperation matters. And more importantly, we held the first 2+2 dialogue at the level of foreign and defense ministers this morning. It was a very substantive meeting with very extensive exchanges on areas of common interest that could encompass both regional and global issues. And I think both sides appreciated the opportunity for this fairly candid exchange on views that seem to reflect a great deal of commonality in our thinking and our positions on various matters that were discussed. The 2+2 dialogue also allowed exchanges on areas that we had an interest in our own neighborhood, such as Afghanistan, other international hotspots. On the COVID-19 pandemic, I think the inadequacy of existing multilateral systems to respond to threats in an integrated and networked world was certainly discussed, and both sides were on the same page. Ministers agreed that the 2+2 dialogue helped in exchanging perspectives on important issues. Russian defense and foreign ministers invited their counterparts, our defense Raksha Mantri and External Affairs Minister, to visit Russia for the next 2+2 dialogue next year. The invitation was accepted, and dates will be decided through diplomatic channels. As you can imagine, very extensive cooperation extended to acknowledging the 50th anniversary of the 1971 Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation signed between India and the then Soviet Union. Also 2 decades of the Declaration of Strategic Partnership. This was in 2000 when President Putin had visited India that the strategic partnership was established. It's been 2 decades since then. Just to sum up, very positive trajectory of trade and investment relationship, new drivers of economic growth such as long-term sourcing and of course investment cooperation. Areas like fertilizers, coking coal, gas were certainly identified as possible areas of mutual interest. I think there was a sense that Russian companies could enhance their involvement in the 13 key sectors of the production linked incentive scheme of the Government of India under our Atmanirbhar Bharat program and Make in India initiatives. There was a greater intensity of inter-regional dialogue on economic cooperation between the states, our states and the regions of Russia. I did mention about the Vibrant Gujarat initiative involving the Russian Far East. As an example, there was some reference to this. There was, of course, a very important development in the signing of the military cooperation program for the next 10 years. We also concluded the joint production of the AK-203 rifles. As you know, this has been under discussion for some time. This agreement was also concluded to satisfaction. It is another example of joint manufacturing under the Make in India program, greater involvement of Russia in investing in India jointly with Indian companies. The international north-south corridor, as I mentioned, provides a very, very cost-effective, faster multimodal transportation between Russia, Central Asia, Iran and India using the Chabahar port, and that connectivity is something that is under discussion between the two sides as well as our other partners, including Iran and Central Asian states. There was appreciation on the space program, training of 4 Indian cosmonauts who are on the Gaganyaan mission. They've concluded their training, but there is many other areas of cooperation with Russia in the space sector, including joint development, joint R&D, etc. In terms of, I mentioned about the importance attached to terrorism by both sides, including the fact that both sides stressed on the need to address the scourge of cross-border terrorism. I think both sides shared their commitment to fight against international terrorism, the need for concerted action against all terrorist groups, including those proscribed by the United Nations. Both sides felt it was important that the perpetrators of terrorism be brought to justice. In that context, there was a need felt to support and strengthen the FATF mechanism and the UN Office of Counterterrorism. On Afghanistan, again, I mentioned the main elements, including the issue of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, concerns in that regard. And of course, both sides felt that the safeguarding of global commons, including our oceans, etc., principles of transparency, and of course the need for a post-pandemic world to have transparent, reliable and resilient supply chains was also discussed. So this is in very brief. Of course, we'll be happy to respond to questions now.